Well, hello everybody, my name is Eddie Cole and welcome to my channel. It's been quite a while since I've made any videos. I guess I've really had nothing important to talk about. I already said everything. Well, not quite, but anyway, I just have been busy doing other stuff. Maybe the doing should have been in quotes, but nonetheless, I've been busy and I haven't been making videos. So, but here we are now, and I stumbled upon this great rap battle uh, while searching through the wonders of YouTube, and I've got to say I've been listening to this for about, well, you see, 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and it seems pretty good, and I think the comments here seem to agree with me on that. And I just wanted to share this experience and kind of analyze this whole thing. And also, of course, if the music itself uses something very interesting, then maybe I will also tackle onto that. But mainly, I guess this will be about the more about this here. So what we've got going on is a rap battle between capitalism and socialism, or I would probably say more inclined with communism from what I've heard up until now, but it might change. And our rap battlers here are Ludwig von Mises, the famous Austrian economist, probably one of the most important capitalist thinkers of the 20th century, and Karl Marx, the communist philosopher who, well, he everyone knows who Karl Marx is. Everyone knows the Capital and the Communist Manifesto. Most people have probably read the Communist Manifesto or a part of it. Anyway, uh, I will probably be quite heavily skewed towards Marx, biased towards Marx. I have personally read almost, I think, all of Marx's literature, probably not all of it, and my experience with Mises is a little bit less than that. I think I read once, like, one of his very early articles, so don't. I I'm not very well versed with Mises. So just bear that in mind while we go on this wonderful adventure of capitalism versus socialism. Or as I said, this is probably more like capitalism versus communism, although there is some talk about centralized power and such, which is more of a socialist aspect. But nonetheless, uh, I think we uh, can start now. So we'll quickly put it back here and see.
You see? It's a revolution. Capitalism's days are numbered.
Then there goes our freedom. If socialism wins, America loses.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
And our civilization.
Okay, all right, we'll already stop here. I think we'll do a lot of pausing here because there are interesting claims already being made. So first of all, you see it's a revolution. Capitalism's days are numbered. So first of all, what I find about this is interesting in the way that this is not so much, uh, especially I mean this part, not so much about Marx, but about Soviet communism. You know, the idea of a revolution. So orthodox Marxism. So Marxism that developed within Soviet Union and in China and Vietnam and Cambodia and uh, Armenia and all of those. You know, the idea of revolution. Whereas with Marx, it's more about a constant struggle towards a communist or a socialist society, however you want to call it. And well, I personally like to make the uh, differentiation between socialism and communism, that socialism is when the means of production are owned publicly, so by the state, and whereas communism is when the means of production are owned communally or uh, commonly, well, as in that all people share the means of production, all workers especially. So this notion that it's a revolution, which actually comes from the socialist character here, it's actually kind of false when it comes to more classic Marxism. But yeah, then, well, if socialism wins, America loses, and our civilization, I don't even care to
And
debunk
our
those. But
civilization.
anyway,
Learn some history. Private property and free markets built modern day society.
Yeah, and modern society is the problem.
there we go. Didn't have to debunk that.
Thank you.
Enjoy the show, boys.
Look at this theater. Look at all of this plenty. This is capitalism.
So capitalism's diabetes?
That too.
Your whole world is coming apart. I pity you.
America is once again at ideological war. After decades of post-war consensus, the great debate between capitalism and socialism has captured the public square. And no two men have more fervently fought this battle than socialist philosopher Karl Marx and classical liberal economist Ludwig von Mises.
First of all, I want to comment the outfits here. Like, of course, these are actually pretty accurate. I mean, Marx would have probably had a bit more of a beer belly there. I mean, we all know. I'm sorry. We know that Marx was an alcoholic, quite an addicted one at that. And well, I don't personally know that much about Ludwig von Mises. This is sort of accurate. I guess this is more of a younger Mises. I personally associate Mises with that. Well, you know, the one older picture of him. But anyway,
Marx versus Mises. Mises versus Marx.
I just realized I've been pronouncing it incorrectly for my entirety of the video, and probably the entirety always when I say Mises, it's actually Mrs. Yeah, because well, it's a German name, not an English one. So yeah, it's Mrs. I guess.
The march of history continues.
So yeah, I don't actually know if this is like some sort of a series, the March of History, but anyway.
Workers of the world, assemble. It's time for the ruling classes to tremble. I'm the people's hero, the MVP, M-A-R-X. Yeah, you know me. Let's go back to when men were free. We hunted and gathered communally, but get ready, cause here comes the twist. A villain appears called a capitalist.
Okay, so this is one thing I very often disagree with Marx, because I precisely believe that the capitalist economy has in some form existed for much longer than you know, the 18th or the 19th century. I personally believe I take the more Hegelian approach, that it's not so much the rich versus the poor, but just in general master versus slave, and that, well, even though the trade has not existed in the same form that it has for the 300 years that it has not existed in the same form, well, say, let's say thousands of years ago, but, well, I guess it would be best to say that, in my opinion, the problem is not so much the rich versus the poor, but authority versus those on whom the authority is subjected. And the thing is that I don't necessarily even mind authority, but when that authority is tunneled through money, then it becomes a problem. So I don't necessarily agree with Marx's ideas on that. The this whole struggle has only existed since capitalism has come to existence, which, well, technically it has existed in some form for the past 500, even 600 years. We at least know that in feudal Japan there were formations of capitalism occurring even back then, and that's of course strange because Japan was completely isolated then. Anyway, let's continue.
Plus the proletariat in chains, exploits our labor in pockets of gains. Through slick ads, he tricks lads and ladies and kind, selling fake needs, he poisons our hearts and minds.
So yeah, there we take a bit of a stab at consumerism, which is of course a very relevant or a very relevant issue with late stage capitalism. I personally don't see that we're even entering late stage capitalism even now, because I believe that late stage capitalism is a lot better than our current situation, which is kind of more of a middling stage of capitalism. Or probably even, we are probably experiencing more of the early stages of capitalism. Because if we are to believe that the humankind is going to survive for the next 1,000 of years, I guess, I see that late stage capitalism is only going to bloom probably around that 3,000 year mark. It's gonna probably take a whole ton of time for capitalism to progress until its ultimate limit, when it will all crash and come down to socialism and communism, whatever it may be. Nonetheless, consumerism is still very important. It's talked a lot about, and yes, I believe it's bad.
Rots our soul through alienation, pursuing limitless accumulation. He works us into an early grave. Through debt steals back the money we save. Greed is the gospel. Profit? The rich get richer through graft and fraud.
I like that. That is very important to note. The religion likeness of capitalism, but I always associate it with more the religion likeness of ideology in itself. Whether that ideology be capitalism, communism, or something in between, whatever that ideology is, it is going to always be religion-like. That is not. It cannot be escaped. However, usually religions have some sort of claims to back them up. It doesn't matter how insane those religions might be, they still usually back themselves up with something that cannot be proven and neither disproven. However, with the concept of capitalism, we just figured out that this is going to rule our lives, and that's that. There's really nothing to back it up. We just figured that out and went with it.
The poor get poor, but you don't care. Doesn't that sound laissez unfair?
Oh yeah, this that's, if someone didn't catch that, that's a reference to the laissez-faire, which is a concept that refers to it's a capitalist concept according to which a group of individuals should be able to trade however they want without any sort of inventionism happening.
200 years I've been singing this song. Now my chorus is 99% strong. The revolution's here. It's time to repent. Your moment is over. Your capital spent.
Yeah, well, here starts the chorus. Yeah, as I mentioned before, they kind of took a misconception, or I guess more of a common misinterpretation of Marx about this great revolution that will just happen like that, and not more of the Hegelian approach. Although I mean, Marx tried to kind of ascend Hegel in many ways, but in this way, I believe he more or less agreed with Hegel that this should be more of a stable, everyday revolution, and not a thing that happens like that.
This is history's lesson. You think he's right? Guessing. All we want is progression. We've had bourgeois oppression. So we look for the truth. As we tighten our boots, who's right, who's wrong, left, right, left, now the march is on. Guten Tag, Marx, nice to meet ya. My name's Ludwig, call me teacher. The master of markets, the Austrian boss. You don't like profits? Well, let's talk loss. The problem with your plan is nobody wins except Stalin, Pol Pot, Ho Chi Minh, Lenin, Mugabe. Remember Berlin?
Oh,
They
hold
built
on.
a wall to keep their people in.
Okay, so we mentioned, let's see,
Problem with your plan is nobody wins except
Stalin, Pol Pot, Ho Chi Minh. Yeah, so here we see precisely orthodox Marxism, which is very different from classical Marxism, which I politically more or less align with. So, for example, let's take the Soviet Union, for example. Very, we all know what happened there. At least 20-30 million people dead during Stalin's reign. Horrible, horrible atrocities against humankind, and that of course goes also with Pol Pot and more or less with Ho Chi Minh also, of course. I mean, we know that Pol Pot probably starved like a fifth at least of his own population. Ho Chi Minh also, even in, of course, we always remember America's atrocities in the Vietnam War, but we also should blame Ho Chi Minh for a lot of stuff. Nonetheless, I'd like to question all of these countries' alignment on the ideological spectrum. Are these truly socialism? And they may be, some of them. For example, Soviet Union. You could argue that Soviet Union is either state capitalism or socialism, not communism, but socialism or state capitalism. Uh, although, as we also mentioned Lenin there, I think he also mentioned Lenin and Robert Mugabe. Uh, when it comes to the early stages of Soviet Union, or I guess Soviet Russia, as it was then, we could see, for example, farmlands being given back from the aristocrats of uh, the Russian Empire, given back to farmers, and this was a sort of communalizing of Soviet Russia, which is actually a sign of communism. However, then of course the power was more or less centralized, and you could argue a lot about it, whether or not the Soviet Union became either state capitalist or socialist. Nonetheless, yes, of course, horrible things happened there. When it comes to Pol Pot, I would say socialism, probably. Agrarian socialism, definitely. Ho Chi Minh, also socialism.
Lenin, Mugabe, remember Berlin?
Lenin and Mugabe, I believe Lenin is, without a doubt.
Stalin, Pol Pot, Ho Chi Minh, Lenin, Mugabe.
Lenin is probably, out of all the characters mentioned here, the most I like him the most out of these. I've read State and Revolution. It's a good book, although I don't necessarily agree with his ideas of the revolution, precisely because he also thinks that they are this and not this, and it just erupts at one point and breaks. But nonetheless, it's interesting that Lenin is mentioned along with these other horrible characters. I mean, Mugabe is still a very controversial character. A lot of people agree with him, a lot of him don't. I don't necessarily. There are a lot of ideological things that I agree with Mugabe, but of course I don't like what happened in Zimbabwe. Nonetheless, when we come to Lenin, Lenin is probably the most sane out of these whole characters, and I more or less, I kind of like Lenin. To be honest, I think this is precisely what happened in Russia, because it was a revolution that happened like this. I I co- I what should I call it? Because I constantly just do this without actually saying what it is. It's uh it's an instant revolution. An instant revolution happened in Russia without really any good plans on how control should be seized actually. And I think Lenin did a fucking fantastic job if we look at that. Of course, there were still very bad things happening in those first 5 years when Lenin was the leader of Soviet Russia. But nonetheless, so I guess my whole point about this is that these are all very different people, and they should be looked at differently. I mean, I condemn most of these people. I'm more or less indifferent towards Lenin, but nonetheless, they are very much different. They support different ideologies, all of them. Stalin, Ho Chi Minh, Pol Pot, Lenin, and Mugabe. Anyway, let's continue.
Remember Berlin? They built a wall to keep their people in. Your theories have a rotten foundation. Built on control, not cooperation. Centralized power completely corrupts. Real people suffer. Violence erupts.
Yeah, this is exactly where it kind of comes muddled, or becomes muddled whether or not we are talking about socialism or communism. They mentioned a lot of things about centralized power. However, when we go back to Marx, they were actually talking more about the common ownership of production, which I would align more with communism rather than socialism. So it's kind of muddled, but anyway, let's continue.
Your system depends on the very same people you decry as greedy, bourgeois, and evil. If we're not fit to run our own lives, why would you expect our votes to be wise?
Yeah, well, that's more of a problem with democracy than socialism or capitalism either. It's the most commonly referenced problem with democracy. People are dumb. How should uneducated, dumb people be able to figure out their or know who to vote for, know something about politics, know a lot about politics at all? And I mean, I believe personally that neither capitalism or socialism can necessarily answer this if they are going to be democratic. Of course, I would like them to be democratic because freedom is it is the most central core principle of my philosophy. Nonetheless, I, however, believe that communism precisely implements this freedom not necessarily through a democratic process such as voting for a leader, but that everyone depends on each other so that everyone may able to keep functioning and society may keep functioning. That's the core of my political philosophy, I guess.
If you really want to help people rise up, unleash the free market, let their lives up. It was capitalism, not a socialist plan. Saved billions in India, China, Japan.
Yes, exactly. Good, Mrs. Mrs. I don't care. Mrs. That's what I'm calling him. So Mrs. here gives a very, very great point, which I try to always state, which is that capitalism, it's well, when we are talking about communism, when we are within communist and socialist groups, there is often this absolute villainization of capitalism, which is, I think, very unfair considering that how much good it can and is able to bring. However, as in that the further capitalism evolves, I believe that it will eventually become better. Nonetheless, if of course, the rate isn't like stagnantly growing. It's not like this. It's more like probably something along the lines of that, and then growing. And sometime it will, but it is still constantly growing over a long period of time. Nonetheless, he mentioned, India, China, and Japan, which are, of course, great examples of the success of capitalism. As in that, well, of course, in China, 1 billion people were lifted from complete poverty to middle class existence in just a matter of a couple of decades. Of course, that was done in Burkina Faso in a few years, and with much better results in 3 years, as I already said, or in 4, I guess, but nonetheless. I don't underestimate capitalism, never, and its ability to do good, although it is built on the foundations of one of the most greedy and evil structures imaginable. Let's continue.
Everyone has a unique purpose and
Actually, I'll just quickly add to that. That is precisely why capitalism is uh, so wretched. Because it can provide a lot of good, but nonetheless it will never bring good for all. That's the point.
brand. No one solution can serve the whole land. Each individual has their own voice. The heart of my theory is freedom and choice.
Always when capitalism is and liberalism especially are conjoined with freedom, I like to think that that is a very very uh, very, how should I say it, a very limited way of thinking about freedom, because freedom is not just being able to choose between a flavor. It's freedom is to be able to choose between flavors, or to not pick a flavor, or to even not have the potential to be free of the potential of having to choose a flavor. I know I'm kind of mimicking Zizek's idea here. It's his idea is a bit more complicated than what I'm trying to express here. But nonetheless, the point is that freedom, the greatest freedom, is precisely the freedom to not be free in certain things, in certain aspects of society. Certain aspects of society can be given to well centralized power, or to the power of others, as I would prefer it. That is the point. That is freedom. To be able to say that I don't want to be able to rule this part of my life, I want someone else to rule it. That is freedom. That is a very perverse, subversive, actualized form of freedom. True freedom.
This is history's lesson. The market's a blessing.
Oh yeah, this is the cars.
Living free from aggression. So we look for the truth.
I like the vocals, by the way, you know, the background vocals.
Who's right, who's wrong?
I guess that girl is singing them.
The march is on. Free marketeers love to play this game. Mao kills millions. Marx gets blamed. It's deceptive, dishonest, plain unfair. Did I drive the tanks at Tiananmen Square?
This is also one of the points that I should made more clear. It is funny how often it is we blame Marxism for the things that happened in the not in the 19th, in the 20th century, in 20th century communism. So yeah.
Man, I'm a humanist. You can check my receipts, but you gotta break eggs if you wanna eat. Don't like violence? Admit defeat. Then I'll call this revolution complete. Till then, let's get a few things straight. I'm not shaping the future, I'm embracing our fate. My utopian forebears weren't that specific, but this analysis is highly scientific.
Okay, there's a few things to unpack here. Actually, two that I want to really get in. So,
Till then, let's get a few things straight. I'm not shaping the future, I'm embracing our fate.
this is the precise idea that that more or less was brought from Hegel to Marx. That it is not about changing anything in the future, but more or less about accepting the fact that history has to evolve. Uh, Even if you don't disagree with me, or if you disagree with me politically, but you were to agree with me philosophically, the whole idea would be that even if you think that capitalism is great, it has to at some point devolve into its own, well, not necessarily its own antithesis, because I believe it's precisely communalism or anarcho-primitivism, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, then capitalism, and then communism. That is how I believe the curve will go. So yeah, the point is not so much about changing the future, but accepting the future and that and accelerating the future. So this is, of course, we could talk about left accelerationism in this, which is the idea that the process of capital has to be accelerated in order to bring forwards socialism or communism. That is, I guess, I can't necessarily call myself communist or socialist. I wouldn't be too. I wouldn't mind if someone were to call me either a socialist or communist, but I wouldn't personally call myself either of those things. I would probably call myself a left accelerationist. The point is that I would probably vote for the most far right people that I could. When it comes to economics, I must say. The economically most far right. I believe it's precisely the idea of the postmodern era that well, neoliberalism is the ideology that I believe dominates our current postmodern or our current shift towards the postmodern era, which is dominated by capitalist economics and more or less leftist ideas about social issues. That's what I believe the future will look like. So more or less Brave New World, I guess, is what we'll have in 500 years. That's my guess. It could take a longer time to reach there, but nonetheless, we are going to reach that point at one time. And that point is necessary in order for communism to ever prevail in its true form, or socialism, or whatever that may be. And then the next point. Yes, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and a lot of the young Hegelians, other young Hegelians also believed that Hegel was a bit too, how should I say it? Post priori, I guess, is probably the right word. So that the ideas presented by Hegel weren't so much based in actual empiric evidence, uh, but more on just thought and experience. And I think that references this. I won't get more into it. If it's not mentioned here, I won't get into it more because it would take me a lot of time to untangle that.
Every social system has governing laws. Capitalism? Doomed because the system generated its own fatal flaws by uniting workers in a common cause. Thanks to
That's actually a very interesting point that isn't usually so often said, which is precisely that capitalism is its own. Well, here we can also circle back to Hegel, or more or less Schelling, I guess, in that everything is its own contradiction in some way. Capitalism is precisely what it aims to be in the development of world history. So capitalism exists there only to be replaced one day by communism, and communism itself exists so that it may one day succeed capitalism, and that something else, whatever it may be, will once succeed communism itself. I guess this is more where I depart from Hegel and go back to Schelling a little bit, because Hegel believed that there will be an end in history, but I believe it more to be that history is ever developing, as Schelling did. So let's continue. Oh wow! As a filmmaker, that is very clearly a doll. very, very ragdoll. Yeah, at this point also Marx seems to more be leaning towards socialism, and then again communism. let's collectivize and set ourselves free. That's more of a communist thing. But he also said, hold on, I don't remember what he said, but nonetheless, this seems very tangled sometimes.
Standard refrain. Oh, that's not the real thing. The most common verse all your followers sing.
Oh yeah, okay.
The
Well,
closer
I'll
we
say
get to your ideal system,
quickly.
further we go down the road to surfer.
Okay, so yeah, now we more can more deeply talk about the common sentiment, which is that real communism has never been tried, and that is one of the most common things that communists and socialists say, and it's often tried to be debunked by capitalists by saying such things as, well, could you do better? And to that I would like to answer, like, are you seriously claiming that there are a lot of people who couldn't do better than Stalin? Because I promise you, a lot of people could. Nonetheless, that's not the point. The point is, I'll actually answer Marx's thing. Because Marx said at one point that the real thing has never been tried, or something along those lines. And I don't necessarily agree. I believe that communism has to some extent been tried. The problem is, of course, that communism, in order to truly take its form, has to exist continuously without interference. That's not what happened in Burkina Faso or in Israel with the kibbutzes. So my two examples of real communism, they're kind of there, I guess, are Burkina Faso from 1983 to 1987 and the kibbutzes of Israel, which still exist in some form, although they have been kind of turned capitalistic now. Anyway, in Burkina Faso in 1983, Thomas Sankara and his rebellious buddies uh, took over Burkina Faso, and things really went great from there. Because Thomas Sankara, well, to oversimplify this, Thomas Sankara really took into heart. Well, he took some aspects of Lenin's theories on socialism and communism, but I believe he was more strictly Marxist in his politics. And he really transformed his country. I mean, the name Burkina Faso was his invention. It was called Upper Volta before then. Burkina Faso means about the land. It's I think it's like the land of the upright people, I believe, and Burkinabe means upright folk, I guess, something along those lines. Anyway, and then in 1987, Blaise Compaoré, who was kind of Thomas Sankara's right-hand man, had been during the revolution, uh, took over his attack force, which was likely aided at least by France, maybe also by the UK and the US, took over and killed Thomas Sankara. And, you know, anyway, during that time, I believe true communism was to some extent used to utilize, although I believe we were precisely in the stage of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is something that I recently changed my mind on. I for a long time believed that the dictatorship of the proletariat isn't necessarily necessary in order to reach communism. However, it may be. I think it might be now. Anyway, that didn't work because capitalism ruled the world, and well, then communism really can't exist in its true form. Then there are the kibbutzes of Israel, which were started before the First World War, and extended. Well, they still exist, but they have more or less become so that their production, all of the things that are produced within those kibbutzes, are used for capitalist gains. So they essentially mimic the communist experience, but the production is used capitalistically. So not real capitalism, really. It's like it's kind of playing communism, I guess. But yeah, those are examples of true communism, kind of. But the problem is that true communism can not really be tried until capitalism has reached its peak. That's the point.
Empirical record can't be denied. Your ideas don't work, but they just won't die. Attention! This is not breaking news. Jevons and Menger lit that fuse. Now here comes the bomb via von Bevert. He blew up your system, exposed the core work. The heart of your theory is exploitation of surplus value. That's a bogus equation. You can't.
Well, I'll drink water and then I'll talk a bit about that. Exploitation of, well, actually it's going to continue, so let's listen a bit further and then I'll talk more.
Value by measuring the cost of labor. That theory of value is lost favor. Value is subjective by every measure. One man's trash is another man's trash.
So Mises turns against capitalism here. That's precisely what capitalism does. It doesn't equate into its system that everything has different values to different people, that there is no objective value to objects, but rather that that value is always subjective. However, within a truly capitalist system, a wheelchair will cost as much to a disabled person as it will to me. That wouldn't happen in socialism. That's the whole point. That everyone to their own need, everyone within their capabilities to work. That was a very much a hardened version of the actual quote, but nonetheless, I think this was kind of a strange point to make from a capitalist viewpoint, that value is subjective by every measure, as it is, of course. I believe that too, and that is why it's not fair that value is made objective within capitalism. So that's interesting.
Value is subjective by every measure. One man's trash is another man's treasure. There's no exploitation if two people arrange voluntary exchange. Man, that's not deranged. That bourgeois transaction you diss with a scarf creates benefit for both, so we're both better off.
Yeah, of course, except if it's a really, really bad deal that just has to happen. For example, if we, well, we can talk about like either very early capitalism, or, well, Africa nowadays or something like that. So if someone earns a $0.25, whereas the owner, who doesn't necessarily do anything to produce the production, earns 100 euros. Does that sound fair? Not necessarily. And say there were only 10 workers, so it's divided. Well, but in that case, the 25 cents is probably not divided, although I'm sure that has happened somewhere. But for example, in that case, the we'll say 10 euros. No, that's way too much. 2 euros for each, so that's $20. $20 goes to those who actually do the work, and then $80 to those who, well, don't necessarily do anything. And that's actually something that might happen. That's a very real wage. Even in Western society, that's a very real wage. The 10 workers who are ruled by one boss gets, well, 5 times more as the combined value of those workers, although their value within the system is much more indispensable than the bosses. So, yeah.
Here's the real problem, the crucial equation. Without private markets, there's no calculation to coordinate courses, allocate resources, incentivize choices, because it lacks prices. Crop should I grow? Should this factory go? Should I pick a JO? How would your planners ever know?
Okay, so You really think that in this capitalist society in which these things can be more or less predicated by those who rule the businesses, so those who own. So you think that's better than it being premeditated by those who actually know something about this stuff? You know, I'd rather have a farmer decide where a farm should go rather than the boss. Or I would rather have a factory worker decide where a factory should go rather than the factory owner. That's just a point.
Your theory is a bundle of confusion. Socialism got crushed by the marginal revolution. This is history's lesson.
Okay. Water break.
Let's pursue our expression. Living free of aggression. So we look for the truth. As we
Please.
play the boots. Who's right, who's wrong? Left, right, now the march is on. We're all better off. Are you kidding me, Mises? My immiseration thesis tears you to pieces.
Okay, so the immiseration thesis is one of the most central aspects of Marxism. It precisely states that it is in capitalism's nature to wages to decrease in relation to the value of production, which intrinsically increases the power of capital within society.
Your economy grows, but not our wages. You call that progress? I think it's outrageous.
Well, he technically explained the immiseration thesis much better than I could, but that's the basic point.
Your economy grows, but not our wages. You call that progress? I think it's outrageous. In 1820, everyone was poor until capitalism kicked down the door. Real wage growth, not stagnation, saved 80%
Okay.
of the world from starvation.
Okay, I want to see that graph again. So
Stagnation saved 80%.
let's think about this a little bit. What happened between this time and this year, more or less? Well, a lot of things happened that could affect poverty. For example, throughout, well, this whole area, democracy started becoming more relevant. Most countries started seceding from monarchies. That could be one thing to take into account. Of course, also important thing is here vaccinations started becoming very relevant. Even science in general is much more. It I believe that this has much more to do with rather technology and science evolving. I mean, we have the fucking free Harper Bosch process being invented around here, or actually, yeah, there, about. So that could probably have something to do with the poverty decreasing rather than capitalism. So yeah.
Set up the world from starvation. You kicked down the door, but you locked us out. That's what your free market is all about. Here's what you do. On your next shopping spree, pick up this book by my boy Tommy P.
Hold on, I think that's Capital in the 21st century.
Locked us out. That's what your free market is all about. Here's what you do. On your next shopping spree, pick up this.
Yeah, Thomas Piketty, I don't know much about him. I know his friend's economist, and I know that Capital in the 21st century is a very, very well acclaimed book, and I should read it probably at some point, but can't really comment much about that.
This book by my boy Tommy P. The pie can get bigger. It's not zero sum. Free markets have lifted the lowest incomes. If you really want to help out the poorest nations, encourage peace, trade, and immigration.
Well, okay, I think Marx is going to answer that.
And your solution is more production,
Yeah.
more pollution, more cheap trinkets and bigger malls, more fossil fuels, more aerosol. Wait, what? A problem this big, we need total control. A Green New Deal.
That also speaks a lot more about socialism rather than communism. So I think they kind of portrayed Marx a little bit poorly here and there. Well, okay, I mean, I guess they portrayed both of them poorly in that sense that most of these claims they make are to some extent capable uh, of being dismissed and debunked. But I'm just mostly debunking Mises's claims because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to just spread my agenda and nothing else.
Save the North Pole. We can't gamble the future on anarchy. Greed's not a plan, it's insanity.
That's actually fun because both of these, I believe, are portraying each other's ideologies as anarchism. As in that uh, capitalism is anarchy because it's just based on the individual. Individual is free to do whatever he wants as long as he can pay for it, of course. And then Mises is more or less portraying communism and socialism as this, well, more or less communalism, primitivism, that sort of thing. That's very interesting, and I see how that point can be made by either side.
Your story's bombastic, your rhetoric's strong. There's only one problem, your theory's wrong. The wealthiest countries do the most to conserve. Haven't you heard of the Kuznets curve?
Okay, bringing up the Kuznets curve. Okay, so the Kuznets curve is basically that. Well, this is also very much an oversimplification, but it's that economic inequality will, when capitalism emerges, in economic inequality will firstly rise, but then decline as time passes on. So that's what Simon Kuznets thought, and even most capitalist economists don't agree with this anymore. Well, we've seen a lot of examples of it happening. But however, I, in some perverse way, do think that Simon Kuznets is right on a very long scale, as in we could be talking of centuries passing. The economic inequality will eventually decline. By how much, I don't know, but that it will eventually decline by some amount. I do agree with that, and I could go on about that, but this has already gone on way too long, so we'll just continue.
Only wealthy societies can afford to go green. If you want a better world, see the unseen. Even carbon will bend to creative destruction with entrepreneurship in the means of production.
So yeah, we went on there about environment problems, and it's interesting to me that Mises, hold on, what did it say? Even carbon will bend to creative.
Entrepreneurship in the means of production.
So yeah, as he also said that only rich countries can afford to go green. Yeah, that's kind of the point. To try to make the green countries go green, or the rich countries to go green, because the poorer countries don't really produce that much fossil fuels, to be honest. And I mean, when I talk about rich countries, I don't just talk about the United States or Switzerland or countries like that. I also include China, which is definitely a rich country, and because of the power being centralized there, it's of course good go green, and it would be very effective. However, we also have to take into account that China, relative to other countries, doesn't really produce any more CO2 than any other like modern developed nation. For example, our dear home Finland produces more in relation to its population. And yeah, you have to take population into account. You know why? Because China has the sixth of the world's population living within it. So that's why.
This is history's lesson. The market's a blessing. All we want is progression. Living free from aggression. So we look for the truth. With the freedom to choose. Who's right, who's wrong? Left, right, left, now the march is on. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The long march of history will come to an end.
Yeah, that's precisely where I kind of disagree with both Marx and Hegel to some extent. in that history will come to an end. That's a kind of a Fukuyamaist thought that I more or less align with Schelling on this.
Hegel was close,
Oh,
but to a priori. Once we break down my dialectical story.
I really didn't think they would bring up Hegel on this, but I'm glad they did. Hegel was close, but to a priori. I guess this really okay, we have to talk about this a bit. I might go on a long tangent here, but anyway, of course I'm a Hegelian. That's very clear by now. Anyway, here Marx says that Hegel was to a priori, and we know that Marx, while definitely not being an analytic philosopher, was much more analytic and towards empiric evidence rather than trying to just figure things out up here through logic or through dialectics, more like. But here's where I disagree much with Marx. A lot. This is a big disagreement here, and more aligned, of course, with Hegel and Kant and Fichte and Schelling, and the others, Husserl and whatnot. Anyway, I believe that a lot of these things are able to be figured out just simply by using logic, without empiric evidence. A lot of the very simplistic things about the nature of existence itself, and the essence of, well, knowing, as well, as Marx claims Hegel to be to a priori, which of course Hegel is very a priori. I don't contest that, but I believe that it's precisely completely okay to be a priori. But it's also good to be somewhat posteriori, because it's of course important to also prove the a priori facts about our nature and about politics as well. So what I'm trying to get at, I want to actually bring up an example here. You know how the Nobel laureate for physics, they were given the Nobel Prize for physics for discovering that the universe is not locally real. So very much an oversimplification here, but the basic point is that objects don't have any of their essential qualities that make them those objects without observers being there to observe those objects. So basically what it means is that reality is subjective, which is something that German idealism has known for the past 300 years. And of course it's great that that it has been proven. Of course it is. And congratulations, by the way, to all those guys, especially Anton Zeilinger. The Nobel Physics Prize was much too delayed for him, especially. But nonetheless, the point here is that I don't agree with Marx here. I believe that Hegel was exactly as a priori as he should have been. He he created the greatest logical way of thought, and he proved a lot of things with it. A lot of very, very intrinsic things about reality with his way of thought, with his dialectics. So, yeah, that's about that.
Hegel was close, but to a priori. Once we break down my dialectical story, proletariat, bourgeoisie, them versus us, you versus me, slave, master, lord, and serf.
That's, of course, referencing Hegel.
New class battles, same old turf. We have what we need to throw the chains off us, organize the economy like the post office. The state takes over.
Okay, I just have to comment on that. It had to be better. I'm post of us. Let's continue.
Watch it wither away and leave socialist man. Our goal is true fairness, outcomes that are equal. Capitalism over. Here's a socialist sequel. Revolution's coming. Prepare for the fight. Workers of the world, you
yeah, it's a precise point of a grand theory of history. Well, the grand theory of history kind of implies that there is an ending to history, which is precisely something that I disagree with, and I agree with Schelling more on that rather than Hegel. But nonetheless, the whole point of any theories of world history are precisely made so that they are in accordance with reality. I mean, of course, Hegel's theory of world history is very much inclined with his theory of, well, with his phenomenology of the spirit. So, yeah.
Your failed predictions? A distraction. Here's some questions that guide human action. Where are we going? What's the right course? What will motivate us? Incentives or force?
What will motivate us? Incentives, of course. That's actually interesting because I personally view precisely incentives as much more evil as than force. Precisely if those incentives are created rather than, well, biological, and most incentives are created rather than being, well, not necessarily biological, but internal. So once the individual itself creates, or creates through, well, spirit. I don't want to use many Hegelian terms here, but nonetheless, sometimes I have to. Anyway, incentives are, they are precisely forcing something, but through the illusion of freedom. Whereas forcing something is precisely the freedom to, well, it's not necessarily freedom to force someone to do anything, but it's well, it's much freer actually than incentives, in the way that whoever is being forced to do something acknowledges their that they are being forced to something, rather than being illusioned with freedom, that they are free to do something, whereas they are in truth being forced.
Here's what you miss from commanding height. Each person's gifts and individual rights. Across every continent, culture, and creed, people have flourished only when free to find passion,
Yes.
profit, charity, and love through the shake of a hand, not a boot from above. Socialism's record isn't hard to
I completely agree with what Maisi said there, except for, I guess,
love through the shake of a hand.
not a boot from above. Well, that also implies that any authority is bad, which I don't necessarily agree with, and that diplomacy, well, yeah, I agree that diplomacy and is good, but anyway, that is kind of dismissive of authority in any form, but I believe authority can play really important forms.
Not a boot from above. Socialism's record isn't hard to parse. First it was tragedy, now it's a farce. Let's unite people from every nation in peace, exchange, and cooperation.
Hold on, this is a this is just a random thought that came upon me. This probably wasn't done on purpose, but this kind of reminds me of Bolshoi Theater, which is a theater in Moscow, which was in the Soviet Union, or actually in Soviet Russia. It was used to host the all union congresses of the Soviet Union, and of course, in the first all union Congress of the Soviet Union, the 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 contract which unified Soviet Russia to the rest of the Soviet stage was signed there. So I don't know if this is. I don't think it's made on purpose, but this just reminds me of the theater, although it's much too small. Nonetheless, it's kind of just a funny remark considering the topic. So I guess that's that.
Wow.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So. I told you Marx was right.
No way! It's Mises all the way! The free market brings the goods!
Yeah, it brings the goods, all right, a heaping pile of inequality and strife.
Try peace and prosperity.
Yeah, I am. I am trying that.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay, because it doesn't look like it.
Did you watch this?
Yeah! Half of it was good.
Oh, that's nice. Anyway, yeah, I would honestly say this was really good. However, I believe that uh, socialism and communism are very much deflated terms today, and I accept that. However, I would like to see the change within the world that those terms would not be so often collided. I think it mostly portrayed Marx's ideas very well, this whole video. And, well, I don't know much about Mises, but from the things that I have heard and read, I think it's probably pretty good. And also, I like the outfits, as I said. Anyway, pretty good video uh, as a whole. So, yeah, thank you for watching. This was probably also a very long video. So, I thank you a lot, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, and goodbye.